in the sleepy town of Redwood, nestled at the edge of an expansive forest. The disappearance of local journalist Emma Wright stirred a sense of unease that hadn't touched the community in decades. Known for her fearless investigations, Emma's latest endeavor was to expose the long-buried secrets of the town's most influential families, the Harrows and the Cliftons. As dusk fell on a chilly Friday evening, Detective Laura Hayes parked her cruiser along the gravel path leading into the heart of the woods, Emma's last known location. The dense canopy above seemed to swallow up the remaining light, casting long shadows that merged with the darkness creeping from the underbrush. Laura's flashlight flickered as she followed the overgrown trail, marked intermittently by hastily made signs that Emma had planted, clues intended for her editorial piece. Each sign delved deeper into the scandalous histories interwoven with Redwood's development, tales of hidden crimes and hushed-up affairs. Halfway through the trail, Laura stumbled upon Emma's recorder, half buried under a pile of leaves. The device was still working, and she pressed play. Emma's voice, anxious yet determined, filled the silence around Laura. She spoke about a hidden drive containing evidence that would blow the lid off the corruption festering at Redwood's core. She mentioned a safe hidden beneath the old Clifton estate's ruins, where the drive was stashed, driven by a mix of professional duty and a personal promise to a friend. Laura ventured deeper, her resolve hardening with each step. The ruins were spectral at night, their decrepit walls cloaked in ivy, windows like hollow eyes watching her every move. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and forgotten memories. Laura's flashlight beam danced across the room, stopping at a large metal safe embedded in the floor under what used to be the study. With trembling hands, she entered the combination Emma had discovered, heard a satisfying click, and swung the heavy door open. The drive was nestled among old documents and trinkets. A chilling laugh echoed through the ruins just as she reached for it. Laura spun around, flashlight piercing the darkness, to find the menacing figures of John Harrow and Charles Clifton emerging from the shadows. Their faces were twisted in anger and desperation, and they knew their downfall was imminent if Emma's findings saw the light of day. A tense standoff followed, Laura's hand inching toward her holster as she backed toward the safe. "Think about what you're doing, Detective." John's voice was cold and steady. "You're out here alone, with no backup, over something that might not even matter tomorrow." But Laura knew better. It mattered to Emma, and it matters to this town, she retorted, her voice echoing off the stone walls. With a swift motion, she drew her gun, keeping it at bay as she dialed for backup with her other hand. The arrival of the sirens broke the standoff, and as backup flooded the ruins, both men surrendered. Emma's drive was secured, and her voice would soon echo through every home in Redwood, revealing the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. In the end, Laura sat by the ruins, watching the dawn break over Redwood, the weight of the night's revelations sinking in. The town would awaken to a new chapter, thanks to the unyielding spirit of one journalist and the steadfast courage of a detective determined to honor her memory. As the first light of dawn stretched over the ruins of the Clifton estate, Detective Laura Hayes felt a peculiar chill that wasn't just from the morning dew. The immediate danger seemed over, with the Harrow and Clifton patriarchs in custody, and Emma's drive secured. Yet, as she sat there, a deep unease gnawed at her. Laura had always heard legends of Redwood's shadowy past, tales of cursed lands and spirits that wandered the forest, particularly around the old Clifton estate. She had dismissed them as town folklore, but the night's events suggested otherwise. A low, guttural growl echoed through the trees as she prepared to leave. The ruins suddenly felt colder, the air thick with a menacing presence. Laura's heart raced. This was no ordinary criminal whispering threats. The ground beneath her seemed to vibrate with the growl, sending a shiver up her spine. Turning her flashlight toward the noise, she caught the fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure, a distorted silhouette that seemed both there and not, flickering between the trees. It moved with unnatural speed, its form blurring like smoke. Remembering the drive, Laura clutched it tighter. Could it be that the secrets it held were not just of human wrongdoing, but of something more ancient and sinister? She recalled Emma's notes mentioning the old Clifton family's dabblings on the occult, and their desperate attempts to contact the other side to gain power and fortune. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, forming coherent sentences that tugged at Laura's sanity. "Return what was taken," they hissed, swirling around her in a spectral breeze. Laura, though terrified, felt a resolve settle within her. She needed to uncover what was so fiercely guarded by these spirits. Ignoring her rising fear, she inserted the drive into her laptop. The files contained interviews, photographs, and documents detailing illegal dealings, but also a series of eerie, inexplicable incidents linked to the estate. Disappearances, unexplained shadows captured in pictures, and accounts of ritualistic ceremonies conducted by the Clifton ancestors. As she delved deeper into the files, the temperature dropped sharply. The shadowy figure reappeared, closer this time, its features more distinct, a tormented, twisted face with hollow eyes that seemed to plead and threaten all at once. The ground shook slightly as if the drive's revelations had disturbed the very earth. Then, a new voice, clear and authoritative, cut through the whispers. "Protect the gatekeeper." Laura realized that Emma might have been targeted by human enemies, and whatever entity the Cliftons had awakened in their dark rituals. With the police now surrounding the area, the spectral presence seemed constrained but increasingly violent, knocking over equipment and sending gusts of wind that felt like the touch of the dead. Laura knew she couldn't leave this mystery unsolved, not just for Emma's sake, but for the safety of Redwood. She decided to take a risk. "What do you want?" Laura called into the forest, her voice steady despite her fear. The answer came not in words, but in a vision that rushed towards her from the shadows, a vision of the Clifton estate in its heyday, with a dark figure standing at a makeshift altar, surrounded by the town's founders. It was a summoning gone wrong, a portal mistakenly opened and never properly closed. Laura now understood the drive held the key to sealing away the darkness the Cliftons had unleashed. Armed with knowledge and a newfound responsibility, she prepared to confront the earthly aftermath of crime and the spectral remnants of a curse that had plagued Redwood for generations. The story was far from over. It was now a battle for the town's soul against an enemy that wasn't bound by the laws of the living or the dead. Once a skeptic, Laura Hayes had become the unexpected guardian against an ancient evil, determined to restore peace or perish trying. Detective Laura Hayes delved deeper into the supernatural history of the Clifton estate through the files on the drive. She came upon a series of cryptic references to a blood moon ritual conducted generations ago. The ritual was intended to summon and control dark forces for the Clifton family's gain, but had unleashed something far more sinister and uncontrollable. The whispers in the woods intensified as Laura connected the dots between the eerie events and the supernatural beings involved. As she read, the air around her thickened with a palpable tension, and the shadows seemed to crawl closer, bristling with a predatory awareness. Suddenly, a piercing howl shattered the morning calm, echoing through the forest with a chilling clarity. The shadowy figure she had seen earlier now materialized into a more defined shape, a werewolf, its eyes glowing with a feral yellow light, its fur matted with the darkness of the woods. This was not just any spirit, it was a guardian of the ritual's secrets, cursed to roam the lands. Before Laura could react, another figure stepped out from the growing mist, a vampire, his skin pale as moonlight, his gaze piercing and ancient. He was Nathaniel Clifton, the last scion of the Clifton line, turned into a vampire to protect the family's darkest secrets across the centuries. Nathaniel's voice was smooth but carried an undeniable threat. "Detective Hayes, you are meddling with forces that surpass your understanding. The drive must be destroyed to maintain the balance between our worlds." The werewolf growled in agreement, its stance menacing, ready to leap. Laura, gripping her gun, realized that bullets would be of little use against these creatures of the night. Her only leverage was the drive, and she had a hunch about its true power. "If I destroy the drive, will it end the curse?" Laura asked, trying to stall for time as she considered her options. Nathaniel's laughter was like the ring of cold metal. "The curse is not to be ended, Detective. It is to be managed. We seek equilibrium, not eradication. You will hand it over or never leave these woods." Laura knew she couldn't trust Nathaniel's word, but she also knew that Emma had uncovered more than corporate misdeeds. She had stumbled upon an ancient pact sealed with blood and shadow. Laura proposed a risky bluff, based on her last ounce of courage and desperation for a solution. "What if I could offer you something better? A way to control the curse without the need for bloodshed every full moon." Nathaniel paused, intrigued. The werewolf snarled, its impatience palpable. Using her understanding from Emma's files, Laura spun a tale of a hypothetical ritual that could harness the power of the blood moon to reinforce their boundaries, keeping their supernatural existence hidden from the human world. It was a gamble, relying on Nathaniel's desire for discretion and control over brute force. After a tense moment, Nathaniel agreed to a temporary truce, intrigued by the promise of a more stable solution that could eliminate the necessity of the violent rituals that bound him and his supernatural kin to the land. As they retreated into the darkness, Laura quickly contacted her supernatural expert contact, an old friend from the academy who had delved into occult forces. Together, they planned to develop a ritual to offer a semblance of peace, or at least a delay in the impending clashes between human and supernatural realms. As Laura watched the dark figures disappear, she knew her journey into the heart of Redwood's darkness was only just beginning. With the drive in her hand and a tentative alliance with Nathaniel, she prepared to dive deeper into a world where myths were hidden amongst humanity, shaping the town's fate and its shadowed legacies. As Nathaniel and the werewolf figures vanished into the dense fog, Laura's heart raced with the gravity of the deception she just spun. She was acutely aware that the temporary truce was just that, temporary, and it was only a matter of time before they returned, likely less patient and more demanding. She contacted Dr. Helen Ross, a specialist in paranormal research and ancient rituals. When it answered, her voice was tinged with sleep but sharpened quickly with urgency as Laura explained the situation. "Laura, you are playing with fire," Helen warned, her voice crackling over the speaker. "But maybe, just maybe, we can turn this to our advantage. I need you to meet me at the old Lockwood Library. There are texts there, ancient manuscripts on blood moon rituals that might just help us." Laura packed up the drive and her equipment, her mind racing with scenarios. By the time she reached the library, the first rays of dawn gave way to a gray morning that promised rain. When Laura arrived, Helen was already there, poring over a large, dust-covered book. "Look at this," Helen said without looking up, pointing at an ornate drawing of a celestial alignment and a ritual circle. "Every 75 years, the blood moon aligns with the celestial planes in a way that could allow us to bind or even alter the nature of the curse. If we can adapt this ritual—" Their planning was abruptly interrupted by a low growl outside the library door. The werewolf had hoped for a shorter time. As Laura and Helen hurriedly gathered the books, the door shattered inward, splinters flying as the massive creature lunged into the room with supernatural speed. Nathaniel followed, stepping over the broken door with an elegant grace that belied his deadly nature. "I grow weary of this human deceit," he hissed, his eyes locking on Laura. "Where is the drive?" Laura, clutching the ancient tome to her chest, faced him squarely. "It's safe from you, Nathaniel, but I've found something that could free you from the need to guard these secrets with such ferocity." Nathaniel paused, the merest flicker of interest crossing his ageless face. The werewolf growled again, but Nathaniel raised a hand to still it. "Babble, detective." Helen stepped forward, her voice steady despite the palpable danger. "The ritual we found strengthens the boundaries between our world and the one you touched during the blood moon. It could lessen the burden and reduce the violence, but it requires a true truce, not just a cessation of hostilities while you plan your next move." Nathaniel's gaze shifted between the book and Laura. "And if I refuse?" Laura's reply was cut by a sudden, sharp rumble of thunder, echoing ominously as if underscoring the threat of his words. She glanced out the broken door where dark clouds were gathering fast. "Then the next blood moon will be upon us with no change, and you'll face us and whatever else the ritual's imbalance awakens. The drive's contents will become public, and your secrets will scatter to the winds." Nathaniel considered this, then nodded slowly. "Show me this ritual. If there's truth to your words, Detective Hayes, perhaps a longer peace can be negotiated." For hours, Laura, Helen, and even Nathaniel worked together, deciphering the ancient text and preparing for a ritual none of them were sure would succeed. As the sky darkened prematurely with the brewing storm, they formed a circle around the old Clifton estate, the very heart of the unrest. As the ritual began, the air thickened, the wind whipping around them as if trying to disrupt the process. Helen chanted from the book, her voice rising over the howling wind, while Laura arranged the ritual symbols with precise care. Nathaniel stood opposite them, his face a mask of concentration and, perhaps, a hint of hope. The werewolf, caught in the ritual's power, shifted restlessly, its form blurring between man and beast, a visible sign of the curse's deep grip. As Helen reached the ritual's climax, a brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, striking the ritual circle with a deafening crack. The energy released was palpable, a shock wave of power that knocked them all to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and deep. As they slowly stood, the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over the land noticeably eased. The werewolf's form settled, the creature now unmistakably more human. His eyes clear for the first time in centuries. Nathaniel looked around, a slow smile spreading across his features. Detective Hayes. Dr. Ross. It seems you have renegotiated the terms of an ancient pact. For now, it appears we have peace. Still recovering from the ritual's force. Laura nodded, her gaze wary but hopeful. It will hold, Nathaniel. But only if we all maintain our sides of this truce. The secrets on the drive will remain safe as long as the peace does. Nathaniel's smile thinned, but he inclined his head in agreement. Very well, Detective. You have my word. This truce will hold as long as my kind remains unthreatened by human affairs. The werewolf, now more man than beast, stood by Nathaniel's side, expressing deep relief and a newfound sense of freedom. He spoke for the first time, his voice gruff from disuse. Thank you for this chance at a semblance of peace. Helen closed the ancient book with a soft thud and looked between the creatures. And Laura, we'll need to monitor the boundaries and ensure there are no breaches. This isn't just a victory. It's a responsibility. As they prepared to part ways, the setting sun breaking through the clouds cast long shadows across the ground, reminding them of the darkness that would always linger close by. Nathaniel paused, his figure silhouetted against the dimming light. Detective Hayes. Should the need arise, we will meet again under different circumstances. Until then, take care in your human world. With those parting words, Nathaniel and his companion faded into the growing dusk, their forms blending seamlessly into the forest. Laura and Helen gathered their belongings, their minds heavy with what had transpired. As they returned to the town, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a temporary respite. We did it, Helen, but I think this is just the beginning. Helen nodded, her eyes on the horizon, where the last light was disappearing. Yes, the beginning. Let's just hope that when they return, it's as allies, not adversaries. We've opened a door here, Laura, and we must be ready for whatever comes through it. They reached Laura's car, and as they loaded the last of their gear, the first stars appeared in the sky, twinkling in a world that was forever changed. They knew they had altered the fabric of reality in Redwood, binding the supernatural with the mortal realm more tightly than ever before. Driving away from the Clifton estate, Laura glanced in the rearview mirror. The estate was shrinking in the distance, a physical reminder of the past that would always be a part of their present. She turned to Helen, a determined look in her eyes. Let's document everything. We need a solid plan. Whatever peace we've brokered today with Nathaniel and his kind, it's fragile. Helen nodded, pulling out her notebook. Agreed. We'll start first thing tomorrow. For tonight, let's just breathe. The road ahead was dark, lit only by Laura's car's headlights. It was a narrow path that wound back toward the town, toward home, but both women knew that their true path was uncharted. A delicate line between worlds they would navigate with care, courage, and a keen awareness of the balance they had fought so hard to achieve. As the night enveloped them, the world seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting for the next chapter in the tale of Redwood, where the line between myth and reality was forever blurred. Shadows resurgent as they drove away from the estate. Laura felt the stillness of the night deepen as if the air was holding its breath. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp ping from her laptop, secured in the backseat. It was an alert. The drive they had left safely hidden was being accessed remotely. Someone was attempting to breach its contents. Helen glanced back, her face a mask of concern. Did you set up security notifications? Laura nodded grimly. Yes. And there's only one reason someone would hack it now. Nathaniel might be playing a longer game than we thought. Turning the car around, they headed back toward the estate. As they approached, the earlier calm had shifted. The wind was picking up, stirring the leaves into whispering frenzies, and a dense fog was rolling in, obscuring the path ahead. Something's not right, Laura murmured, eyes scanning the dark woods. They parked a short distance from the leading site and proceeded on foot, using their flashlights to pierce the thickening mist. As they neared the ritual site, the ground was unexpectedly disturbed, and fresh earth turned over as if by frantic digging. Helen pointed to a set of tracks that led away from the circle, large and uneven, suggesting that someone or something had dragged a heavy object through the forest. Following the tracks, they found themselves more profound in the woods than they had ever been before. The air grew colder, the mist denser, and then they sighted a faint, eerie glow emanating from a decrepit old cabin that folklore claimed was haunted by the original witch of Redwood. Approaching cautiously, Laura whispered, I've heard stories about this place. They say she kept boundaries between worlds before the town even existed. Helen clutched her book tighter. If Nathaniel is using this place, he might be trying to open a doorway we can't close. The cabin door creaked ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the glow came from dozens of candles arranged in a complex pattern on the floor. At the center, the drive was connected to an old, arcane device that hummed with a power neither woman had felt before. Suddenly, Nathaniel stepped out from the shadows, his expression one of betrayal and anger. "You should not have followed me here," he hissed. "We had a truce," Laura exclaimed, stepping forward with her hand on her weapon. Nathaniel's laugh was cold and hollow. "A truce is only as strong as its guardians. Detective, you think I'd let you hold the fate of my kind in your hands forever?" From behind him, the Witch of the Woods materialized, her form ghostly and shifting, her eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. "The detective is not the guardian we desire," she crooned, her voice echoing unnaturally. Laura and Helen realized the gravity of their mistake. Nathaniel hadn't sought peace. He'd sought a more potent guardian for his world's sinister secrets, a supernatural entity that wouldn't hesitate to use the drive's power. The candles flared as the witch raised her hands, and the device began to whirl louder. Helen flipped through her book, looking for anything to help them counter the spell. "Cover me," she yelled, finding a protective incantation. Laura fired her gun into the air, the loud bangs disrupting the witch's concentration momentarily, causing the glow to flicker. Helen chanted loudly, her words slicing through the growing chaos. Nathaniel advanced his features, contorting in a fury. Just as he reached Laura, the ground beneath the cabin shook violently, the ritual destabilized. Laura pushed Nathaniel back into the spell's epicenter with a desperate shove. The witch screamed a sound that fractured the night as the magic turned inward, consuming her and Nathaniel in a blinding light. When the light died down, the cabin was silent. The device was destroyed, the drive intact but deactivated, its secrets rendered inaccessible by the spell's backlash. Breathing heavily, Laura and Helen exited the ruined cabin, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. They had stopped a great evil, but at a cost they had yet to fully understand. As they walked back towards the town, the actual weight of their guardianship settled on their shoulders. Redwood was safe, for now, but the boundaries they guarded were more fragile than ever. The story of Redwood's shadowed paths and hidden gates was far from over. The world was watching, waiting for the next guardian to rise, and the next chapter to unfold in the twilight dance between the seen and the unseen. Laura and Helen stepped out of the cabin, their hearts pounding in the eerie silence that followed the chaotic confrontation. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the early morning mist lingering like a ghostly reminder of the night's horrors. As they returned to the car, an unsettling feeling gnawed at Laura. The silence was too deep, too complete. Even the usual sounds of wildlife were absent, and it was as if the forest itself was stunned by the events. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a piercing howl. The sound sliced through the air not far behind them, a stark reminder that whatever they had stopped inside the cabin might have been only part of a giant, darker puzzle. "Run!" Helen shouted, the urgency in her voice spurring Laura into action. They sprinted through the underbrush, branches whipping past them, the howls growing closer and more frenzied. They burst out of the tree line and made it to the car, locking the doors just as shadows began converging on the forest's edge. Large, menacing forms, silhouetted against the dim light of dawn, watched them with glowing eyes. Werewolves, remnants of the ritual's power, or guardians of the forest's secrets, were on the hunt. Laura started the car and floored the accelerator, gravel spitting under the tires as they sped away. The werewolves gave chase, their forms blurring between beast and man as they ran. Helen clutched the manuscript, flipping through the pages. There might be something here to ward them off, keep them at bay. Laura kept her eyes on the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel. "Just find it fast, Helen." The road twisted through the woods, the werewolves keeping pace. Just as Helen found a protective chant, a dark figure stepped onto the road ahead. Laura slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop inches from the figure. It was Nathaniel, not consumed by the spell as they had hoped, but somehow changed, more powerful and dangerous. His eyes burned with a malevolent fire, and the werewolves halted at his command, encircling the car. "You cannot escape your fate, Laura." Nathaniel's voice was cold, his form shadowy and fluid. The drive was just the beginning. The secrets it held were mine to protect, And you've unleashed them upon the world? Laura faced him, defiance in her eyes. We stopped your ritual, Nathaniel. Whatever you're planning, we'll stop that too. Nathaniel smirked, his figure beginning to dissipate like smoke. Look around you, detective. The world is not as it once was. The veil between our realms grows thinner with each passing moment. You've changed the rules and must abide by them. With those words, Nathaniel vanished utterly, leaving them surrounded by the watchful werewolves. But instead of attacking, the creatures retreated into the woods, their eyes lingering on Laura and Helen as if issuing a silent warning. Laura exhaled slowly, turning to Helen. What did he mean? The veil is thinner. Helen looked grave. It means that the boundaries between our world and theirs are weakening. We may have stopped one crisis, but we might have started something much larger, something that could change everything. As they drove back to Redwood, the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the road. Laura felt the weight of Nathaniel's warning and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The drive's secrets were no longer a simple matter of supernatural entities hidden in the shadows. They were a catalyst for a change that might engulf their world in darkness. As they reached the edge of town, the first signs of that change were already apparent. People were gathered in the streets, talking animatedly, pointing at strange phenomena only they could see. The air felt charged, electric with unseen energies. Laura and Helen knew they had to prepare to find allies and gather knowledge. The battle to maintain the balance had just begun, and they were now at the heart of it. Defenders against an encroaching darkness that sought to blur the lines between worlds forever. The drive might have been silenced, but its echoes would resonate through Redwood, calling forth both hero and monster in the shadow of the coming storm. The atmosphere was palpably tense as Laura and Helen re-entered the town of Redwood, usually quiet and idyllic. The city now buzzed with a strange energy. People gathered in small, anxious clusters, speaking in hushed tones about the unexplainable events that had started to occur, shadows moving against the grain of natural light, whispers in empty rooms, and chilling gusts that swept down the streets with no apparent source. Laura parked the car in front of the town hall, which now seemed to watch over Redwood with an ominous presence. The pair went to the sheriff's office to regroup and plan their next move. Inside, Sheriff Daniels was pacing back and forth, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow of concern. Laura, Helen, I'm glad you're back, he greeted in a low voice. Something's stirring up the town. Reports of disturbances are coming in from all over and more than just your usual small-town superstitions. Laura nodded, her mind racing with the implications of their earlier encounter. It's not just superstitions, Sheriff. Something has changed since we stopped Nathaniel's ritual. It's like we've opened a door we can't close. Helen added, the boundaries between our world and the supernatural have been thinned. We are seeing increased activity that suggests we deal with more than isolated incidents. It's systematic, possibly controlled. Sheriff Daniels rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What do you need from me? We need to establish a watch group, Laura suggested. We need local volunteers who can report any unusual occurrences immediately. And we need access to all historical records of the town. Anything that might tell us what we're dealing with. Consider it done, the sheriff replied, turning to his computer to organize the setup. Meanwhile, Helen's phone buzzed with an alert from her network of occult researchers. She scanned the message, her eyes widening. Laura, the disturbances aren't local. Similar reports are increasing from other parts of the country. The implication hung heavy in the air. Their small town was only the epicenter of a much larger crisis. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. We need to prepare for the worst. If this is as widespread as it seems, Redwood could be the key to stopping it from spreading further. Nathaniel knew more than he let on. Determined, they equipped themselves with every tool and resource the sheriff's office could provide, armed with night vision cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and old town maps. They set out to patrol the town, determined to identify patterns or signals that could be the key to restoring the barrier. That night, under a sky so clear it made the world seem exposed, they split up to cover more ground. Laura took the northern edge of town, where the forest crept close to the homes of Redwood's residents. The veil felt almost palpably thin, the air tingling with unseen energies. Suddenly, a scream shattered the night's calm. Laura sprinted towards the sound, her heart pounding. In a clearing just beyond the last row of houses, she found a group of teenagers gathered around one of their friends, who was convulsing on the ground, his eyes rolling back in his head. One of the teens looked up at her arrival. Panic etched across her face. Help him, please, He just started freaking out. Said he saw something in the trees watching us. Laura radioed Helen and the sheriff for medical backup, then turned her attention to the boy. She noticed a faint, shimmering outline around him, something she could only see through the lens of her camera as spectral residue. The thinning of the veil is allowing entities to cross over, Laura muttered, snapping photos for further analysis. Hung in there, kid. Help is on the way. As the night wore on, more reports came in, each more bizarre than the last. Objects moving on their own. Eerie voices captured on phones. Shadows that didn't align with their sources. Each incident added to their growing database of supernatural activity. Back at the sheriff's office, Laura and Helen pored over the data, and a map of Redwood was laid out in front of them, marked with its occurrence. Patterns began emerging. Ley lines of mystical energy intersecting at several key points around town. We need to focus on these points, Helen concluded, circling the areas on the map. Whatever's coming through is using these lines as pathways. Their plan was set. They would place barriers at these points, using modern technology and ancient rituals to reinforce the weakened boundaries. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had to prevent their town and possibly the world from becoming a gateway to realms unknown. As dawn broke over Redwood, Laura and Helen were already positioning the first of their makeshift barriers at the northernmost ley line intersection, using a combination of salt circles, blessed iron filings, and digital monitoring equipment. They created a ward strong enough to deter minor spectral entities. As they activated the first barrier, the air shimmered slightly, an invisible curtain pulling tight across the invisible wound in the world. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Okay, that's one down, Laura said, checking the readings on her equipment. The electromagnetic field showed decreased activity, indicating their barrier was holding. They moved to the following site, a small park in the center of town where the ley lines cross near an old, gnarled oak tree. The tree seemed to pulsate with a strange energy, its branches swaying slightly despite no wind. As they prepared the second barrier, the ground beneath them trembled. Helen looked up, alarm flashing across her face. That's not good. We might be dealing with something bigger than we thought. Before they could react, a deep, guttural growl rolled through the park, and a creature that defied logic emerged behind the tree. It was large, covered in scales that glittered in the morning light, and its eyes burned a fiery red. The creature snarled, its gaze fixed on the barrier equipment. Back off slowly, Laura whispered to Helen. Her eyes locked on the creature. They moved back, but the beast advanced, intent on stopping them from completing the barrier. Just as the situation seemed dire, the sound of a car engine roared through the park, and Sheriff Daniels, along with two other squad cars, pulled up. The officers stepped out, weapons drawn. Get away from them, Daniels shouted, his deputies firing rounds into the air to draw the creature's attention. The creature turned towards the noise, giving Laura and Helen enough time to complete the barrier. As the last component was activated, a pulse of energy shot through the ground, the air crackling with power. The creature roared in frustration, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, as if pushed back by the force of the barrier. Breathing heavily, Helen and Laura exchanged relieved glances. Thanks for the timing, Sheriff, Laura said as Daniels approached, holstering his weapon. We need to hurry, Daniels said, looking around warily. Whatever that was, it might not be alone. Let's put up these barriers around all the intersections before anything else decides to show up. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. With the help of the sheriff's department, Laura and Helen managed to set up barriers at all critical points throughout Redwood. By noon, the town seemed calmer. The earlier sense of foreboding slightly diminished. Exhausted but resolute, the team gathered at the sheriff's office to debrief. We've bought ourselves some time, but this is just the beginning, Laura said, looking at the map with all the barriers marked. We need to find out why Redwood is the focal point for these disturbances, and how we can permanently seal the breaches. Helen nodded in agreement, scanning the ancient texts for clues. There's more to the history of this town than we know. We need to dig deeper, understand the origins of these ley lines, and possibly find a way to reinforce them against further intrusions. Sheriff Daniels stood, ready to support whatever steps they needed to take next. Whatever you need, you've got the full support of my department. Redwood is our home, and we keep our people safe, no matter what comes out of those shadows. As they prepared for the long haul, the trio felt renewed determination. The mysteries of Redwood were deep, and the threats they faced were unlike any they had encountered before. But together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay beneath the surface. Guarding their town against the unseen forces that sought to break through, the battle was far from over, and they were just getting started. As the days progressed, the makeshift barriers held, but the atmosphere in Redwood remained charged with a palpable tension. Laura and Helen knew their temporary solutions would only hold for a while. They needed a more permanent plan to seal the town against the otherworldly forces threatening to break through. With this in mind, they arranged a meeting with local historians and geologists to delve deeper into the history of Redwood's ley lines and the town's origins. The meeting took place in the local library's basement, where ancient maps and books were spread across long tables, illuminated by the soft glow of desk lamps. The ley lines converging in Redwood are no coincidence, explained Dr. Emily Saunders, a geologist specializing in geomagnetic fields. This town is built on what we call a spiritual nexus. It's a point where the Earth's magnetic energies intersect with spiritual planes, making it a hot spot for paranormal activities. Laura listened intently, piecing together the puzzle. So, what you're saying is that Redwood is naturally predisposed to these breaches? Exactly, Dr. Saunders confirmed. And if we can map the flux of these energies, perhaps we can devise a way to stabilize them. Armed with this new understanding, Laura, Helen, and a team of experts mapped the geomagnetic energies around Redwood. Using advanced equipment, they tracked the ebb and flow of energies, marking spots where the barriers seemed weakest. Meanwhile, the town's residents reported fewer disturbances, crediting their efforts. However, a deep unease settled over Helen as they worked. "We're missing something," she muttered one evening as they reviewed the data. "These energies are being manipulated." It was then that Laura received a call from Sheriff Daniels. "You need to see this," he said, his voice urgent. Laura and Helen rushed to a secluded part of the forest where the sheriff was waiting. They arrived to find him standing over a bizarre scene. Intricate symbols had been carved into the earth, circling an old, gnarled tree, their epicenter precisely on one of the ley lines. These weren't caused by natural forces, the sheriff pointed out. Someone or something deliberately did this. Helen knelt down, examining the symbols. "These are sigils, ancient markings used to amplify spiritual energies. Someone is trying to open the gates wider." Realizing the gravity of the situation, they decided to consult with Nathaniel despite their mistrust. They found him at the edge of town, his demeanor somber, his appearance less menacing but more fatigued. "We need your help," Laura began, straightforward and firm. "Someone is manipulating the ley lines, using sigils to amplify the breaches." Nathaniel looked at them, his eyes narrowing. "And you think I have a part in this?" "We don't," Helen interjected, "but we believe you might know who does." Nathaniel sighed, a sound almost like resignation. "The sigils are of ancient origin, used by my ancestors to communicate with beings from other realms. It seems someone has uncovered these old methods and is now exploiting them. Can you help us stop them?" Laura asked, her tone earnest. Nathaniel paused, considering their request. Finally, he nodded. "I can, but understand, the forces at play here are dangerous. We must act quickly and decisively." Together, they formed a plan. Nathaniel guided them in creating a counter-sigil that would negate the manipulated energies. Under his direction, they worked through the night, inscribing their protective sigil around the old tree. As dawn broke, they activated the sigil. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground as the counter-sigil's power surged through the ley lines. Slowly, the air cleared, the oppressive weight that had hung over Redwood lifting. Exhausted but hopeful, they watched as the natural order seemed to restore itself. The breaches began to heal, the veil strengthening once again. In the aftermath, as Redwood returned to normalcy, Laura, Helen, and Nathaniel met again. "You've saved your town," Nathaniel said, his voice showing respect. "We saved it together," Laura corrected him, a smile tugging at her lips. "And we'll keep it safe, no matter what comes." As they parted ways, Helen turned to Laura. "Do you think we'll see him again?" Laura pondered and then nodded. "I think so. Whatever lies beneath Redwood isn't done with us yet." And so, the town remained vigilant, its guardians ever watchful, knowing that the peace they had found was a brief respite in the ongoing battle between their world and the unseen forces waiting just beneath the surface.